He-Man and the Masters of the Universe brand went through a lot of design development back in 1980, 1981, leading up to the worldwide launch, US launch in 1982. I mean, it obviously became an international brand, but if you looked at the brand in 1980-81, it might not be as recognizable. I mean, yes, you could probably pick out prototype Skeletor and say, yep, that definitely looks like Skeletor. I mean, there's a little bit more deco on the bat, and the face looks not quite as skull-like, but, that clearly reads as Skeletor. And as the brand continued to evolve and details were lost, paint ops were removed in order for costing to work and shared parts, well, a lot of different iterations of names were also used. Lords of Power was a running name for a long time of the brand, but it was felt by some of those in the C-suite executive floor, shall we say, that it was a little too religious, and they wanted a name that wasn't going to have so much of a connotation, with the word Lord in it. So the name was scaled back and changed to Masters of the Universe. But that wasn't actually the first name used for the brand. Before Masters of the Universe and before Lords of Power, the brand was actually tentatively called the Fighting Foemen. Okay, so what are fighting foemen, or what are fighting men? Well, I mean, we know what fighting men are and fighting women, but who in the world are the fighting foemen besides being an early name concept that was proposed for the brand? Well, to answer that, we're going to have to do a little toy history, and Masters of the Classics is all about that, because Masters of the Universe Classics, it's about using everything, like, bagel seasoning. And we wanted to sell the greatest number of toys possible. I mean, yes, we were not selling them at Toys R Us, we were selling them online. And that meant looking at the entire history of the brand, especially the early history, and seeing kind of what nuggets we could pull out of that and extrapolate into toy concepts, because, well, we wanted to sell the greatest number of toys and have the largest He-Man line possible. Now, we'd already covered so many of the major characters, and this deep into the line, we're now in the first quarter of 2013, if you will. Well, it was time to start looking at what else we could do. And one of the things we looked at was when Don Glut worked on the brand. So he was he's known as the author of a lot of science fiction and comic books. He actually wrote the novelization of Empire Strikes Back and is responsible for actually a lot of the quotes that we say from that movie. Like I'd rather kiss a Wookiee. That's right from his book, not from the script. He's also a big dinosaur fan. I should throw that in because I'm a big dinosaur fan. He's written like a bunch of encyclopedias about dinosaurs and whatnot. And he was brought in by Mattel to write the first concept for what became Masters of the Universe. And he called the brand the Fighting Foemen. If you want to see this entire document, it is read out loud as sort of a story time execution on this channel, but essentially it's more or less the same story. Instead of Castle Grayskull, there's a power gem, and Beastman is the main villain instead of Skeletor, because it's kind of like Jungle Man versus Jungle Beast. That's why Jungle was such a big part of it, and some of the names were different, like Wingman or Airman, but it evolved, like everything in Masters, and that is who the Fighting Foemen became, or rather, the influence. So here are the Fighting Foemen, but your question is, okay, well, who are they, and why are they deserving of this name that was once part of the brand? Well, we knew we were digging at the bottom of the barrel. I mean, absolutely, because this name was obscure, and the visual for the characters was just as obscure. And I'll get into more of that at the tail end of this video. So we tried to sprinkle into the line a lot of Easter eggs for potential future figures, like how in Skeletor's bio it mentioned Demo Man as the that green character there who combined with Keldor to make Skeletor. Likewise, in Vicor's bio, we mentioned the Fighting Foemen. And this was all deliberate because it was like dropping breadcrumbs. The idea that potentially maybe we get to the Fighting Foemen, maybe not, but by mentioning it in the bios, much like Demo Man, it set the seed. And we also made sure details on things like the maps reflected this. So you can see on the map of Preternia, if you look all the way on the left, you can see the Valley of Gnarl, which is where Vicor defends, and then you can see Foe Castle behind it, which is a tie-in to the Fighting Foemen. All right. So who are the Fighting Foemen in Classics? Well, while the name was lifted from the original draft, the visuals were drifted from the model kits. Now, a lot of us had Masters of the Universe vehicles when we were kids. Monogram did a series of snap-together, pre-painted model kits in the 1980s with slightly different colors compared to the toy versions. The Talon Fighter you can see there has a red cockpit, and the Roton actually has a cockpit shield, I guess, that goes on that wasn't on the toy, as well as the red face in the front. And despite the color changes, they're still recognizable. But if you look very carefully at the artwork on the packaging for the model kits, you'll see inside of each of the cockpits is a character. And it's definitely not someone we recognize. It's not Merman, it's not He-Man, it's not Teela, it's definitely not Mighty Spector. But there's clearly someone driving each of these vehicles. And for years, fans were asking, well, who are these characters? Could we get them as toys? Could we get their names at least? And this seemed like a really cool way to combine the Fighting Foemen name and use it, and have a group of characters that are linked together, in this case the model drivers, the model kit drivers, and making them the Fighting Foemen. So there you go. That's who these characters are visually. And to make them more toyetic and work better for the line, we gave them swappable chest plates. So one chest plate reflected their vehicle icon, and then the second chest plate, which could be removed, you can see in the front of the armor there's that sort of a wedge-shaped groove in Sheridan Shield Maiden's chest there, and so you could pop in a Horde logo in order to make them members of the Horde, and it came with the removable logo, so you could swap them. So you got two different ways to display and two ways to put them on your shelf. Now, their real names, Shield Maiden Sheridan, Destroyer, Doggo Tor, if you will, so that was completely a creation of the Four Horsemen. We basically went to them and said, hey, we're doing brand new characters, they've never been named before, we'd love for you guys to come up with original names for these characters. And honestly, I thought they were going to actually name them after themselves. That was the offering, much like we offered them to have their faces on Royal Guards. But the Horsemen have already had several toys in the McFarlane line, and they've kind of been there, done that. So they decided after reviewing the concepts that instead of naming them after themselves, the sculptors, they would name them after different members of their team. There's not just Four Horsemen. I mean, Eric and Cornboy are sort of the most well-known, as well as Chris. But they had a painter, Sherry, they had sort of an assistant who got them coffee, and as well as a mold maker. And the idea was that they were going to honor the rest of their studio staff by using their names as the Fighting Foemen, and that's hence why we got Shield Maiden Sheridan, named after Sherry, their painter, Destroyer, and Doggo Tor. And hey, I mean, very MOTU names, and it was cool to have that all, I guess, pay off and work out, because much like we, incorporated Terry Higuchi's name as one of the blasters in the line, I think Marlena carried the Higuchi blaster. All right, so back to the whole bottom of the barrel thing. So yeah, we knew that these characters were obscure, but we also had to sell them to the fan base because it was a pre-buy.
Buy my book! Buy my book! Buy my book! Buy my book!
And I knew as marketing director that was going to be a bit of a challenge, and I knew it was very important that we show them at subscription purchase time, which was during the Maddie Collector fan panel at Comic-Con. We would show the figures at the fan panel and then put them up in the booth right afterwards for people to take pictures and, put them all over the internet. And I kind of knew that if fans were getting 3 figures at a high price point, I think it was like $60, I want to say, maybe it was more than that, the SRP, we were going to have torches and pitchforks because it was an expensive set of obscure characters. So I knew we had to get them out in the first quarter of the year, and that meant having it ready for Comic-Con. And when I mentioned this to engineering that I needed the samples to show at Comic-Con, they were like, yeah, that one's not happening. It got delayed. I was like, no. If we surprise fans with this set, they're going to have our heads on a platter. We have to show this at Comic-Con because it's too obscure of a set to just sort of show up and surprise people. And engineering did come through. I remember it was a lot of back and forth, and there was definitely some fighting between groups and making this happen and trading resources and getting things to work out. But despite the Fighting Foemen happened, and we were able to get the prototypes ready for Comic-Con to show off as part of the subscription incentive. Since, again, this was an expensive set full of obscure characters. And Fighting Foeman really did show us how far we could stretch the line, and that this kind of did go a little bit too far. But they wound up being great figures, and I'm really glad we made them. And the line continued to impress, going deep and paying off a lot of Easter eggs spread through the maps and the bios. I'm really proud of them. And once again, the Horsemen just absolutely knocked it out of the park. So, for those of you who grew up in the 80s, playing Masters of the Universe toys, and if you had these model kits, which I did not, nor did I have the free t-shirt, well, at last you could finally have the drivers, the Fighting Foemen.